There is a country that has never won the World Cup. 3 finals, 3 defeats. 1974, 1978, 2010. 3 times the Netherlands, dressed in orange, played some of the most beautiful football the sport has ever produced and walked away with nothing. 3 times the cruelest possible ending, close enough to touch the trophy, not close enough to lift it. That history matters. It matters because it's the backdrop against which everything we're about to talk about becomes genuinely complicated. Because the Netherlands going to the 2026 World Cup isn't just about football for Dutch fans. It's about a debt that feels like it's been building for 50 years. It's about Virgil van Dijk, who has captained the national team more times than any player in history, leading a squad that could finally be good enough to go all the way. And it's about a petition started by a television producer and journalist named Toon van de Koeken that eventually gathered 174,000 signatures from Dutch citizens. A petition that went to the Houses of Parliament, that was handed in person to Dutch MPs, that asked a question nobody in football governance wanted to answer officially. Should the Netherlands withdraw from the 2026 FIFA World Cup? Now here's the most important thing to say right at the start. The Netherlands is going to the World Cup. The KNVB, the Royal Dutch Football Association, ruled out a boycott. The Dutch government confirmed that the decision lies solely with the federation and that there's no reason for the cabinet to intervene. Virgil van Dijk will lead the Oranje out. Ronald Koeman's squad will take the field in Arlington, Texas on June 14th against Japan. But between the petition being launched and the KNVB ruling it out, something happened that the football world needs to understand properly. Because 174,000 people signing a petition in a country of 17 million is not background noise. That is 1 in every 100 Dutch citizens. That is a number that got this question debated in a national parliament, that forced a public conversation about the relationship between sport, values, and national identity that the Netherlands has not had since 1956. So today, we're going to tell the whole story. How the petition started, why it grew so fast, what the Dutch football establishment said in response, what it means for Van Dijk and Koeman and the players who had nothing to do with any of this, and what the moment we're living through reveals about something bigger, about what football is and what it's becoming. Let's go. The petition started on a Saturday in January 2026. That's important because the speed of what followed tells you something about the temperature in the room. Toon van de Koeken is not a fringe figure in the Netherlands. He's a well-known broadcaster, journalist, and public intellectual, the kind of person whose name carries weight in the public conversation. He launched the petition on a Saturday afternoon. By Sunday evening, it had crossed 50,000 signatures. By Tuesday of the following week, it was at 100,000. By the time it was formally submitted to members of the House of Representatives in March, it had passed 174,000. The language of the petition was direct. It read, "We call on the Dutch government not to allow the Dutch national football team to participate in the World Cup. We do not want our footballers, through their performance at the tournament, to implicitly support the violent policies against innocent migrants." It went further. It invoked the idea of being on the right side of history. It called for the Netherlands to keep their players home. Now here's the context that explains why that language landed the way it did in the Netherlands specifically. The Dutch have a particular relationship to the concept of principled resistance. It's woven into the national identity in ways that go deep, into the culture, into the school curriculum, into the stories people tell about who they are. The 1956 Olympic boycott was mentioned repeatedly by commentators drawing historical parallels. That year, the Netherlands withdrew from the Melbourne Olympics in protest of the Soviet invasion of Hungary. It was one of the few countries in the world to take that stand, and it remains a point of national pride decades later. Van de Koeken's petition was consciously invoking that tradition. The argument was essentially, we have done this before. We have refused to participate in sport when participation felt like endorsement. Why would we not ask the same question now? And on social media, that argument spread fast, not just in the Netherlands. The petition and the conversation around it were picked up by football audiences across Europe, in Germany, in France, in Denmark, in Scandinavia. For several weeks in late January and early February 2026, the Dutch boycott debate became the focal point for a much wider European conversation about what the World Cup was asking fans and football nations to accept.
Here's where things get interesting, because the response from within Dutch football was more nuanced than a simple yes or no. The KNVB, the federation, said it had no immediate plans to reconsider participation, but added two words that mattered: for now. They said they were closely monitoring geopolitical developments and remained in consultation with the Dutch government. That's not a firm refusal. That's a conditional position. "We're going unless something changes" is a different statement from "we're going full stop." KNVB President Frank Pauw, speaking publicly, framed the federation's position around their identity as a football organization rather than a political one. They follow FIFA guidelines. They follow UAEF guidelines. Their job is sport, not foreign policy. It was a reasonable argument. It was also, to many of the people who had signed the petition, a slightly frustrating one, because the entire point of the petition was that sometimes the distinction between sport and everything else is itself a political choice. The Dutch government's position was clear and separate. Minister Miriam Sterk stated explicitly that the decision lies solely with the KNVB, that the government does not play a role in determining whether the national team competes, and that there is no reason for the cabinet to intervene. The Dutch cabinet will send an official delegation to the tournament as normal. And then there was Tom Egbers. This is the detail that most international coverage missed. Tom Egbers is a television host who has covered Oranje games for 40 years. 40 years of Dutch football. He declined to add his name to the petition, and his reasoning was significant. A boycott, he argued, is not the right response, not because the concerns are wrong, not because the underlying issues don't matter, but because a boycott leaves the stage to everyone else. It removes Dutch football from the conversation at the very moment when being in the conversation might matter most. That is a position with its own logic, and it's one that carries weight coming from a man who has spent 4 decades inside Dutch football culture. The petition was submitted to Parliament. The Parliament received it. No formal action was taken. The KNVB did not change its position. The government did not intervene. And Virgil van Dijk will be leading the Oranje into Group F on June 14th. But the 174,000 names on that petition don't disappear. They sit in the background of this entire tournament as a reminder of something that the football world is still working out how to process. Now let's bring in the historical comparison, because the Netherlands boycott conversation didn't happen in isolation. It happened as part of the broadest European debate about World Cup participation since the discussions around Russia in 2018. The 1956 Melbourne Olympics is the most cited precedent in Dutch discussions, but there's a closer parallel in football itself that's worth understanding. The 2022 World Cup in Qatar produced the most sustained values-based debate football had seen in years. Human rights conditions for migrant workers, the treatment of LGBTQ fans, the ban on alcohol in stadiums. Players from multiple nations, including Germany, wore symbolic armbands or made public gestures of protest. The German team covered their mouths for their pre-match photo at their opening game in Qatar, a direct response to FIFA threatening sporting sanctions for captains who wore One Love armbands. And then Germany went home in the group stage, and the tournament produced some of the most extraordinary football matches of the decade. And Messi lifted the trophy. And 4 years later, the debate around Qatar has been largely absorbed into history, while the football memories remain vivid. That pattern is the one that makes 2026 different from Qatar, because the Valleys debate in 2022 was concentrated in the 3 or 4 years before the tournament, building slowly and then arriving at a peak when the squads landed in Doha. In 2026, the debate has been continuous, shifting, and multi-layered across an 18-month period. New concerns have arrived every few weeks.
the boycott conversation has been reignited multiple times by different events: travel bans, visa bans, immigration enforcement questions, the social media screening proposal, and the sequence of geopolitical developments that kept generating fresh friction throughout early 2026. The Netherlands petition began in January, climbed to 100,000 signatures in days, and was still generating coverage and new signatories when it was formally submitted to Parliament in March. That's a 2-month sustained public conversation in a single country about whether to send a football team to a World Cup. Nothing quite like that has happened around a major tournament before. Not at this scale, in this country, over this duration. This matters because it has changed something in how a significant portion of the Dutch public understands what their national team's participation means. Even for the fans who didn't sign the petition. Even for the fans who strongly disagree with the boycott argument. The question has been asked publicly and loudly enough that it's now part of the story. Oranje playing in Arlington on June 14th will happen against a backdrop that includes 174,000 of their own citizens who asked for them not to go. Let's bring it back to the football, because the players are the ones who carry all of this on their shoulders when they walk out of the tunnel. And what's happening inside Koeman's squad right now is genuinely compelling, completely separate from anything that's happening off the pitch. The Netherlands have not won the World Cup. They've come closer than almost anyone to winning it without actually doing so. The 1974 team, total football, Johan Cruyff, one of the great sides in the sport's history, reached the final and lost to West Germany. The 1978 team reached the final again and lost to Argentina. The 2010 team, with Arjen Robben and Wesley Sneijder and Robin van Persie, lost in extra time to Spain in Johannesburg. 3 finals, 3 losses. The Dutch call it Dutch football's trauma, and they're not being dramatic. Ronald Koeman's squad for 2026 is not a vintage Oranje generation in the way that 1974 was a vintage generation, but it's a genuinely strong squad with quality across the pitch. And they qualified well, unbeaten through their qualification campaign, 6 wins and 2 draws, scoring 27 goals and conceding just 4. Memphis Depay led the scoring with 8 goals during qualification and became the Netherlands' all-time top scorer in the process. That is a number that means something in a country that produced Johan Cruyff and Ruud van Nistelrooy. Virgil van Dijk is the beating heart of this squad. On November 17, 2025, the night the Netherlands sealed qualification with a 4-0 win over Lithuania, Van Dijk captained the side for the 72nd time and broke the national captaincy record previously held by Frank de Boer. He collected his 88th cap. These are not just trivia numbers. They describe someone who has been the leader of this team across an entire generation, who has held the dressing room through good tournaments and bad ones, and who is now heading into what is likely his final World Cup with a squad capable of making a genuine run. Behind Van Dijk, the Netherlands have defensive depth that is the envy of most nations. Jan-Paul van Hecke alongside him at center back. Mickey van de Ven and Nathan Ake as options. Denzel Dumfries at right back, 3 times more used than any other player under Koeman, with attacking and defensive value that has made him a consistent starter. Jeremy Frimpong providing another explosive option wider. In midfield, the Ryan Gravenberch and Frankie de Jong partnership at the base provides the kind of composure and ball-playing quality that allows the Dutch to control games. Thierry Reinders, now at Manchester City, gives Koeman an advanced option who can join attacks and make late runs. Toon Koopmeiners adds another dimension. The concern heading into the tournament is the forward line. Xavi Simons, who was expected to be a key creative force in the final third, tore his ACL and is ruled out. That is a significant blow. Cody Gakpo has endured a difficult season at club level, though his form for the national team has been more reliable. Memphis Depay, at 32 and now playing for Corinthians in Brazil, is not the same player he was at his peak, but he delivers at international level in a way that continues to defy expectations, and his all-time scoring record keeps him relevant regardless. The opening group game is against Japan on June 14th in Arlington, Texas. Japan are not straightforward. They qualified from a strong Asian group. They're well-organized, technically excellent, and they caused genuine problems for elite European nations at the last World Cup. It's the kind of match that separates tournament sides from sides that are merely attending. If the Netherlands win that game convincingly, the rest of Group F becomes manageable. If they struggle, the familiar Dutch anxiety, the feeling that this generation will also somehow fall short, comes flooding back. Here's the bigger picture that all of this opens up. The Netherlands boycott debate, more than any other national conversation around this tournament, exposed something that football has been reluctant to confront directly. The question of what it means in the modern world for a national team to participate in a tournament hosted by a country that significant portions of its own fan base find troubling.
It's not a new question. Sport has wrestled with it throughout history. The 1936 Berlin Olympics, the South African rugby tours of the apartheid era, the 1980 and 1984 Olympic boycotts, the debates around Russia in 2018 and Qatar in 2022. But the speed at which it arrives and spreads now, a petition to 174,000 signatures in a matter of weeks, shared across every platform simultaneously, means the football world can no longer manage it the way it used to, with distance and delay, with formal statements that land after the controversy has peaked, with the reassurance that by the time the tournament begins, the noise will have faded. It doesn't fade the way it used to. It builds in layers. And the Netherlands' response to this particular version of the question is an interesting one. The federation held its ground, but carefully. The government declined to interfere, but formally. Tom Ebgers declined to sign the petition, but offered a reasoned alternative argument. The KNVB said for now, not forever. Every institution involved in this conversation left some space in its position for the possibility that circumstances could change. That's not weakness. That's an acknowledgement that the questions being raised are real enough to deserve something more than dismissal. And in that acknowledgement, there's something honest about where Dutch football stands, a federation that wants to compete, that believes in the power of sport, but that isn't pretending the conversation around this tournament is just background noise. The Netherlands are going to the World Cup. They should go. They have a squad that could genuinely challenge for the title that 3 previous generations came agonizingly close to winning. Van Dijk deserves the chance. Koeman deserves a chance. The players who have dedicated years to building toward this moment deserve the chance. And when they run out in Arlington on June 14th against Japan, with everything still to play for, the 174,000 names on that petition will still be part of the story. Not because they stopped the team from going, but because they asked the question loud enough that the whole football world heard it. What do you think? Not about whether the Netherlands should have boycotted, that question has been answered, but about what comes next. Are the Dutch a genuine contender this time? Does Van Dijk finally get the World Cup winner's medal his career deserves? And is this squad, with Gakpo, Reinders, Gravenberch, and Depay, different enough from the sides that reached 3 finals and won none of them? And here's the broader question I want to leave you with. When 174,000 people in one country sign a petition asking their football team not to play in a World Cup, what does football owe them? Not in terms of action, but in terms of acknowledgement. Is the KNVB's carefully worded "for now" the right kind of response? Or does the football world need to find a better language for this kind of conversation? Leave your answer in the comments. These are the conversations that make football more than a game. If this script gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more football fans who want proper depth. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're covering every angle of this tournament from now until July 19th at MetLife. This story is still developing, and as always, football never stays quiet for long. See you in the next one.